What happened then?
Well, I complained about that. I went back into the assistant clerk's office, and I pointed out the fact that the handwriting was totally different, and that I was basically accusing someone from the district of adding that information. And in response, she didn't really acknowledge the fact that someone had written it right then, but she did say that, oh, yes, when he came in to turn in his signatures, he added information into the header boxes that he didn't have before when he was collecting his signatures. So basically, on the due date for the signatures, he had all the signatures signed, but he didn't have the header filled out. And so the people that signed his forms didn't know what they were signing for. And in front of the school board clerk, he filled in that information. And that's just fraud. And so when he did that, and when she admitted that, I told her that I'm going to need her to sign an affidavit just stating what she witnessed. And that's normal practice for a clerk, basically. If you want to challenge signatures, one of the ways that you have proof of your challenge is to get an affidavit from the clerk. If it's an address challenge, then she'll just say that, yes, this address is outside of the district, and sign an affidavit. So it's standard practice for them to sign an affidavit, so she said she would. And then about 10 minutes later, I was finishing up typing up my complaints, and the superintendent Schulte walked in, followed by Human Resources Director Steve Sperry. Steve Sperry just stood in the back listening. But Dr. Schulte came up to me and said, "What are you doing? Why are you wasting the time of my clerk?" I told her I was simply checking the signatures as part of my job, and I said I would have done that process either the Wednesday or the Thursday before, because you only have a 3-day time period to check these signatures, and Deb Blazer was scheduled to be out of the office on those 2 days. So I only had 1 day to check the signatures, and so it took me all day because it's a long process. And so I told her that, and then she said, so what do you need? And I said, well, I'm just finishing typing this up. I'm going to send it to the assistant board clerk. She's going to print it out. I'm going to sign it, and she's going to notarize it. And she said, no, what else do you need? And I said, well, I also need an affidavit from her stating what she witnessed the candidate do in front of her. And she said, no, she won't be signing an affidavit. I said, well, what role do you have in this process? You're the superintendent, and you should have nothing to do with these elections. She said, well, she's my employee, and we're going to check with our legal counsel to make sure that she should sign this affidavit. I said that there's no legal issue here, and that you have no role in this process, and your attorney has no role with this clerk. And she said, well, we're not going to let her sign the affidavit. And I said, well, we only have 2 hours left before the deadline. I need this affidavit in order to file my challenge. And she said that won't be happening. So she also said that I was kicked out of the room because there was another meeting afterwards. The meeting was a one-on-one meeting between the assistant board clerk and just someone, I don't know who. But I think they kicked me out of the room just so I couldn't work there anymore. And so I left. I went and printed off my forms, and I actually printed 2 forms for David DiStefano. One that said that basically made the exact statement that the assistant board clerk made to me, with a caption that said that the affidavit will be enclosed, and another version that said that she was willing to sign an affidavit, but that the superintendent blocked her from doing so. And so I brought both back to the school district, and I offered the superintendent one more opportunity to allow her board clerk to sign an affidavit, which was less than an hour, or about an hour and a half until the deadline. And she chose to continue to block her from signing the affidavit. And so then I left. I got the documents notarized, and I dropped them off and filed my complaints around 4 p.m. on Friday, the deadline. The deadline was, I think, 5 p.m. So,
what happened then?
Well, after that, the candidates who I challenged had 3 days to attempt to rehabilitate their signatures, and so they had until the close of business at 5 p.m. on Monday. So they had the entire weekend. They were notified sometime between 4 and 4:30, I believe, by the district that there was a complaint, and so they had the full 3 days to file a rehabilitative paperwork. And so on that Monday morning, I went into the district office at 9 a.m. and I stayed there until 5 p.m. To basically just wait for these candidates to drop off their paperwork. And I stayed there the entire time. Only one candidate returned, and that was Diane Ayers. She submitted paperwork at around 4 p.m. I requested a copy of that paperwork because that was the reason I was there. And the district, after I made that request, the district apparently called the district's attorney, and the district's attorney showed up 15 minutes later telling me that I would not be getting a copy of that paperwork. I said it's a public document, and there's no reason not to. She said that because the deadline for turning in rehabilitative paperwork is 5 p.m., I wouldn't be getting a copy of anything until the next day because they were not allowed to make copies. She said that no one in the district's allowed to do any work after 5 p.m., including using the copy machine. And so I said I was willing to stay afterwards, but she said I couldn't, and then that I had to come in the next day. I realized why that was the next morning when I arrived at the district at 7:30 a.m. They immediately gave me a copy of the paperwork. And when I saw the paperwork that they gave me, Diane Ayer's paperwork, the rehabilitated printed names, she had an opportunity and she would have been able to get on the ballot if she went back to 100 of the people that signed her forms and asked them to print their name legibly above their signature. She was lazy and she decided not to do that. And so instead she just simply typed up the names and printed a Word document and said that these are the candidate names and they know who I am, and that it's just unfair for her to be kicked off the ballot. And so she had multiple opportunities to do the legwork to get this done, and she opted not to do that. And so no matter what, I believe that she's going to be kicked off the ballot. The other candidate, David DiStefano, I didn't expect him to be submitting any other paperwork because my complaint didn't really require that, but he did submit an affidavit stating that the people that signed his papers knew that he was running for the Janesville School Board, and he cited things like the fact that he is a current school board member and that he's been in the newspaper before. But an incumbent candidate shouldn't have any extra benefit and have a lower threshold for getting on the ballot than a non-incumbent. And so just the fact that you're on the school board doesn't mean you don't have to abide by the rules. And so that was one problem with this paperwork. But the other problem was since he didn't come in on Monday, since the district knew that I was there the entire day on Monday and that they couldn't say that I was there, that he came in, his documents were notarized with the date of the Friday before. And so I submitted my complaints at 4 p.m. The candidates were notified between 4 and 4:30 p.m. So what the notary is basically saying, and what David DiStefano is saying, is basically that he found out that he had a complaint against him. He typed up an affidavit within an hour, and he delivered that affidavit to the school district. I believe the affidavit was on school district letterhead, but it was definitely notarized by the superintendent's secretary, Denise Jensen. And so I believe that the notary fraudulently notarized that document because there was not enough time between when I filed my complaint and the end of business at 5 p.m. for him to have typed up his affidavit, returned it, and gotten it notarized by the secretary. And also, I got a copy of the sign-in sheets at the district, and there is no evidence that candidate DiStefano was at the district on Friday when he claims that he got his documents notarized. So I believe that's why they wouldn't give me a copy of the documents before 5 p.m. on Monday, because candidate DiStefano had not turned in his rehabilitated documents and affidavit.
So who made the final decision to remove those candidates off the ballot?
So generally, the assistant board clerk would be making that decision and has made that decision in past elections. But due to the undue influence that the superintendent had been exhibiting, and because of the pressure that she had been putting on her district employee, it was basically up to the elected board clerk, which is Carl Domerheisen. And he's been the elected board clerk for a few years, and he's never really had any influence or any involvement in the election process. He basically only signs off and certifies things. And so he was surprised to know that he had any role at all. But he did find that out. And in fact, it wasn't necessarily his decision to make. There are no board rules that say that he has that authority. The only rules is a Government Accountability Board rule. And the Government Accountability Board basically states that complaints are to be ruled on by the board clerk or the entire school board. And that's an issue because, and I told Commissioner Domerhausen that he didn't have to make this decision, but the district's attorneys the entire time were telling them that he did have to make the decision, and they erroneously told him that he had to make that decision before 5 p.m. on this Tuesday. And so he actually had 10 days to make that decision. And so he's been getting bad advice the entire time from the district's attorneys who've been trying to manipulate this process. And he was also told by the district's attorneys that they were his attorney. And he told me himself that he had his attorney, and I asked him who it was, and he said it was Julie Lewis, the district's attorney. And that's just not the case. The board has their own attorney. And so he's been getting bad legal advice from the superintendent's attorney this entire time, and he's just been very confused, and he's been taken advantage of. This entire process has been manipulated, and he's been at the center of it because the district wanted him to be at the center of it, because he has no background in election law. He's never been involved in elections before, and he's the type of person that they can take advantage of, and they did.
That's a lot of That's a lot of accusations.
It's not. I saw this all with my own eyes. I know I'm the only person. One of my biggest mistakes was the fact that I went in there on Friday to challenge these signatures without another witness with me. And from now on, whenever I challenge signatures, I'll be taking pictures of those signature forms because it's just so amazing that they would take the forms from my hand and add more information while I'm challenging a signature. I just never seen anything like that.
Have you reported back to AFSCME what's been going on?
Oh yes, I mean we're a large union, and we obviously have many resources. I'm working with multiple attorneys.
How do they feel about this?
Well, everyone agrees that there have been multiple violations of both our public sector labor law, Wisconsin Statute 11170, also election law violations. I've also filed an election official violation against Superintendent Schulte for her role in this process. It also names her secretary Denise Jensen and the assistant board clerk Deborah Blazer. There are multiple other legal avenues we can seek, and me personally, I have at least 2 defamation lawsuits that I do intend to file eventually, civilly, which would have nothing to do with my local. It would be me representing myself because both School Board Commissioner Deborah Schilling and Superintendent Schulte have both defamed me in an attempt to basically delegitimize my claims. And it was a failed attempt, and I intend to seek whatever remedies are available to me.
What remedies are available to you?
Well, I'd be able to, if I was able to prove that they did seek to defame me, it would be libel. I'd be entitled to compensatory damages, and since they're public figures, I would have a higher threshold in order to win my claim, and so I'd have to be able to prove that they acted with intent to injure my reputation or with a reckless disregard for what the truth is. And I think I am able to prove that. And if I am able to prove that, I'd also be entitled to punitive damages. So I'd expect that to be thousands of dollars. So we'll look into what exactly the damages will be. But I think it would be very significant.
What is your strategy here?
My strategy, I only intend, I mean, like I said, when I made the initial claim against Commissioner DeStefano, I didn't necessarily think the claim would hold up. But the cover-up that's happened since, I think absolutely he should be taken off the ballot. Like I said, I don't have another candidate, so he'll probably win the write-in anyway. But this is really just about what's right and to weed out corruption in this district and in this community. It's been more than just the school district that's been involved here. It's also been the local paper. The Janesville Gazette has refused to report on this fairly. Nick Crow, who's a hand-picked journalist that is basically in the pocket of Dr. Schulte, and the newsroom director, the person in charge of the entire newsroom operations is also involved, Scott Angus. He's refused to print the truth. They've printed multiple false statements, and I've called them on it, and rather than fix the problems, they've just basically deleted entire sections of their story without any without basically updating or printing a correction. They've just if you look at the recent story about the candidates actually being kicked off the ballot, that story has been revised heavily 5 times. It started as a story about me getting kicked out of the school district building, and it morphed into a story about the candidates being kicked off the ballot. So there was an entire news article about me being escorted out of the district by police, and it was just bashing me personally. And since that got basically the community reacted in support of me because the community thinks that election meetings should probably be open, especially if the district is trying to send their attorneys in to manipulate elections. And so I attempted to be a part of the meeting where they determined the resolution of my complaints, and they refused to allow me to be part of the meeting, despite the fact that the meeting only included Assistant Board Clerk Deborah Blazer, who works for the district, the elected school board clerk Carl Domerheisen, and then also the district's attorneys, who were holding themselves out to be the school board members' attorneys. And so I wanted to be a part of that meeting just to watch the meeting, so we knew that it would be a fair process, and they wouldn't let me in the meeting. The district's attorney told me that the district would be calling the police if I attempted to go to the meeting. I told them to call the police. I attempted to go into the meeting. The police came. I wasn't making any loud noises. We have members that work in the district, and they didn't even know the police were there. It was such a calm scene. But I was just trying to explain to them that there's no rational reason for this to be a closed meeting. The superintendent was telling the police that this was a closed meeting, like a school board meeting would have a closed session, but there's no statute that allows this election proceeding to be a closed meeting. And I asked her what statute she was citing. She didn't have one. So basically, she was using the police as just useful tools for her to remove someone that was causing her personal problems because she was being threatened, only because she's very likely, as a result of the situation, to either be forced to resign or be fired by the board. And so having me removed and keeping this entire process in the dark is beneficial to her personal career. And so the police officers asked who's in charge of this building. Superintendent Schulte said she was in charge, and the police officer said, "Do you want him here?" And she said no. And